Hi, I'm Mark, I'm a teacher, and in this video I want to take a look at what our new Labour government is proposing to do for education. So their manifesto, it doesn't actually have a section on education as such, but it has a section called Break Down the Barriers to Opportunity, and that contains most of what they're talking about doing for education. So there's 5 things I'm going to pick out from what Labour say they're going to do for education and talk through in this video. So the first of those is Labour's policy to recruit 6,500 new teachers. Secondly is their proposal to reform Ofsted, the government inspectorate of schools. Thirdly, the proposal to create 3,000 new nurseries. Next up, the idea of creating free breakfast clubs in every primary school in the country. Then the idea of reforming the curriculum for schools, what children get taught in schools, and to modernise that. And then finally, their proposal to end VAT exemption for all private schools in the country. All right, let's take a look at them. Okay, so first up, is the policy to recruit an extra 6,500 teachers. So this is a bit of a flagship policy for Labour, not just in terms of what they're saying about education, but it's one of the things they bring up when they talk about their plans for government overall. And I think it's a pretty strong indicator of Starmer's approach to really sort of highlight education and try to use it as a way to distinguish themselves from what the Tories are doing. Last time we had a new Labour government in 1997, Blair had his famous education. Education is the top 3 priorities for government, and they're not quite making that such a big deal out of education, but they certainly do want to emphasise how they are different from the Tories on education. For example, Starmer said this recently.
The Labour government always takes education seriously. It is now possible to compare these 13 years with the 13 years under a Labour government, and you can see the difference, the emphasis on education and the quality of education. That's why I said what I did about the last Labour government. Okay,
so 6,500 new teachers. So it's at the very least, it's some positive rhetoric on supporting and improving the education offer in the state sector. But is this just rhetoric, or will it make an actual real difference? So let's take a look at the numbers a little bit. There are currently 470,000 teachers, roughly. And in November last year, 2023, there was 2,800 unfilled vacancies, which is a number which has been steadily rising. And there's been, for a long time, there's been talk of a bit of a crisis in terms of recruiting teachers and also retaining them. So, okay, is this number significant then? Well, yes, it is, because it's way over the number of unfilled vacancies, and it's around about 14% increase on the current number of teachers. So that's obviously significant. So obviously that can improve problems with class sizes and classes getting overstretched and having too many students per class. But also another really important consequence of this policy could be that you get a lot more specialist teachers in front of children. Instead of asking teachers to, can you cover a bit of maths, bit of RE, etc., and you have teachers ending up to teaching 2-3 subjects, this helps to get teachers focusing on their specialism. But at the moment, obviously, it's just a target, it's a policy, we'll see how they do, but it does have potential to make a real difference. Okay, next up is Labour's promise to reform Ofsted. So this only gets a minor mention in the manifesto. It's only actually mentioned in the kind of costing appendix at the back. So I wonder if they don't really see it as something that the public are overly concerned about. But it's absolutely a massive issue amongst the teaching profession, and I think it's going to be popular amongst teachers that this is being looked at. The political context for this is So a major incident in January of 2023 last year was the suicide of Ruth Perry, a head teacher who committed suicide whilst waiting for the publication of an Ofsted report on her school, which was going to be downgraded from the top rating outstanding to the lowest grading of inadequate. And so obviously this focused a lot of attention on the extent to which Ofsted's putting an unnecessary amount of pressure on teachers. And later that year, another thing which put this issue back into the headlines was that Flora Cooper, another head teacher, refused to allow Ofsted inspectors into her school, and she cited Ruth Perry's suicide and talked about her objective to sort of protect her staff. So although that eventually, with local authority mediation, eventually those inspectors did go into the school, the fact that a head teacher was refusing to let them in on that basis obviously really highlights the pressure that teachers and head teachers feel Ofsted puts them under. So this review, the main aspect of the review that we know about is that they are looking at getting rid of the one-word judgments of either outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. They put aside £45 million for this review, so presumably it's going to involve a little more than just getting rid of those one-word reviews, but we will obviously, like the rest of these policies, wait and see what actually comes out of it. Okay, next up is the Labour government's promise to carry out an expert-led review of curriculum and assessment. So in other words, to look again at the national curriculum and what it is that pupils in schools are actually learning, and also how they're examined. This is to be led by Professor Becky Francis, whose research interests specialise in gender, ethnicity and social class, and how they affect inequality and how they affect attainment outcomes in schools. It remains pretty vague, and it's really just a promise to review the curriculum, but they're using words like, so they want to look at a rich and broad, inclusive and innovative curriculum. The curriculum offer has absolutely shrunk under the Tories, partly because of the recruitment crisis. So this policy ties into the first policy I talked about, having more teachers, so getting more specialism into teaching and also being able to offer wider curriculum. A lot of schools in the UK have cut subjects like art and music and drama in order to cope with the fact they just have fewer teachers. So the manifesto, for example, says art and music will no longer be the preserve of a privileged few. Now I think one of the key questions here is, how is this review going to fit into the ongoing debate about knowledge versus skills? And I would say, the new Labour government of 97 to 2010 put a big emphasis on skills-based curriculum, where the emphasis is on taking account of who the learner is as an individual and developing skills within them. You can contrast that to another end of the spectrum, which we could describe as a knowledge-rich curriculum. Now, when the Tories came in 2010, before they took power, Michael Gove was saying, we need to have a return to focus on bodies of knowledge, knowledge-rich curriculum. And on this view, you don't take account of who the learner is. It doesn't matter who the learner is. Every child must be given the same body of knowledge. So the Tories, they made appeal to a figure in American education theory called E.D. Hirsch, and his idea of cultural literacy, that all children within a given culture need to be given the same body of knowledge. And they also used a UK equivalent, Michael Young, who talked about powerful knowledge. Again, with this idea of bodies of knowledge, children must be given knowledge that they are entitled to, and we shouldn't actually consider who the children are. So we shouldn't be giving different curriculum to, multi-ethnic urban students, for example, as opposed to rural students or things like that. That it shouldn't matter who the student is, they need to be given the same entitlement to knowledge. So I don't think that the new Labour government have massively decided where they sit on this knowledge versus skills debate. There's very little in the manifesto. They do use the phrase knowledge rich, but they don't actually say we're going to have a knowledge rich curriculum. They say that we're going to build on the fact that teachers have delivered knowledge rich syllabuses. So I think they're a little uncertain here. It's a difficult one. I do think it ties into political controversies because it ties into culture war issues of, should we be looking at people through the lens of social class and gender ethnicity or not? So we will see where this review goes. Okay, I'm going to look at two policies together here because they overlap in a lot of ways. The first one being Labour's promise to create 3,000 new nurseries, not just nursery places, but 3,000 new nurseries, and also to provide free breakfast clubs in every single primary school. Okay, so the 3,000 nurseries, how are they going to do that? Well, essentially by allowing primary schools or helping primary schools to add on nurseries to their existing provision. So it's not going to involve a massive amount of new building. It's just about using existing space and extending the hours and the space that schools use, I suppose. Okay, so they do say that in terms of funding, the manifesto contains the word that this will extend the amount of government-funded childcare. And obviously, the more state-funded childcare you get, the easier it is for parents to get into work. And this, can obviously potentially benefit not only working families themselves, but it fits in with New Labour's overall governmental mission of promoting economic growth. But we'll see. Let's see how this goes. The free breakfast clubs obviously fits in with the agenda to combat child hunger and poverty. However, I'm recording this, not long after this Labour government suspended 7 MPs for voting to end the benefit cap on families with more than 2 children. And so let's see, of course, how this policy will play out and how this government will play out in terms of reducing child poverty and child hunger. But the Tory record on this has obviously been atrocious. This should not be something that Labour are failing to address. Okay, so the policy I'm going to end on is perhaps most politically controversial, which is the announcement that private schools will no longer be exempt from paying VAT. So they'll now be subject to this extra taxation, which will either slash their profit margins or put up their prices. So one of the significant things for this is that the manifesto says that all of the education policies I've talked about in this video are to be funded by this one policy. Okay, so this is borrowed, a little bit from this kind of Corbynite leadership, which in general Starmer's obviously been very keen to dissociate himself and Labour from. But this is perhaps some kind of concession to the sort of leftist tradition within the Labour Party. Across the political spectrum, there's a bit of division on this policy. It's not surprising that a lot of the right-wing press and politicians have attacked this policy. But I think whatever damage this does to independent sector, and it's likely to hit hardest smaller independent schools rather than very well established, very wealthy, more famous schools like Winchester, Harrow, etc. I'm sure they'll be able to suck up this extra cost. But whatever damage it does to the independent sector, I think anyone would be hard pressed to argue that outweighs the potential poverty alleviation and increase in quality of the state sector that this policy should bring about. All right, so as I record this, it's still the same month that the new Labour government's been elected, so we don't know to what extent they're going to achieve these targets. We can review that as they go along. So I've mentioned the things they flagged up. There's plenty of other things going on in terms of education policy. Looks like there's going to be a review of pay coming up for teachers. There's a review of PSHE ongoing, and we'll see what the government recommends on the basis of that. There'll be plenty of other things to keep an eye on as well. Please, if you can give me any encouragement by liking this video, commenting or subscribing, that would be great. Thank you.